Namaste. So, today, when we think about yoga, we talk about different paths: Karma Yoga, Gyan Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raj Yoga. Then we have the Patanjali's, Ashtang Yoga, etc., etc., Hatha Yoga. But man is not cut into these different parts. We, our journey of life, life itself, is an integral movement. So to dissect yogas into all these different paths may be helpful for a degree kind of specialization, especially when we seek to escape from the circle of nature. So we want to find a little hole through which we can escape into the beyond. Then it's okay that we have all these different paths and we can pick and choose one of them to pass into the beyond. But quite naturally, it leaves the enigma of life, life that is fallen here below the stars, just as it was. One man's single person's escape doesn't lift up the race. And yet, one man's perfection still can save the world. These two lines, one is where Sri Aurobindo says, escape cannot lift the fallen race. On the other hand, he says, one man's perfection still can save the world. And this we see as the effort of the Vedic rishis, who in their quest of immortality, they stumbled upon the doors of perfection. We put it like that. Of course, death for them was not just the death of the physical body, it was a state of ignorance, a state of darkness, a state of unconsciousness, a state of falsehood, because of which everything in our life was falsified. So, in human beings, there is a natural tendency to create a synthesis, to join. But our natural experience of creation is one of division. It's almost like when darkness is very dense, we can take an image. I cannot feel even my own body, when a train passes from a tunnel in Maharashtra, if you ever travel through train, you will see that there are several tunnels. Some of them are so dark, for a moment you don't know where your hand is. And God forbid if you keep your hand on somebody else and think it's your child and then you realize it's not your child. It can happen because we don't know. In that state, everything seems separate from each other. When the light comes, we begin to see that no, though they are seemingly separate, they are interconnected. For example, we are in the same bogie. So, similarly, in a state of extreme division in which we live, everything seems separate and distinct. So, because there is a natural tendency in man towards oneness, at the core of everything there is oneness and unity, we want to discover a way to synthesize, to join them together in a harmonious way, not the synthesis that we find on TV debates where two different ideologies are speaking, and at the end you are more confused than what you were before the debate began. So it's not synthesized by uniformity, by crying hoarseness of voice. That was not the way that the Vedic seers chose. They took the problem, they understood the problem in just the right way. So the right way is, for example, when I look at my existence, our existence, we understand, that there are various limitations. The wrong way to look at it is that, well, I will remain a limited being forever. And now let me make the most of what this life has to offer. Most human beings look at it like that. But the Vedic seers took a different approach. They looked at the entire evolutionary journey. It's not documented like that, but Vedanta does speak about evolution. It speaks about the evolution of the soul through forms. And when they looked at the entire evolutionary journey, like any sensible, logical human being, they questioned, is our ascension, is our journey, is the story of evolution complete? It was the most logical conclusion. Leaving aside what later on Vedantins started saying that man is the last term, because in man one can meet the creator. But if we really look at closely at what the Vedas have to say, it doesn't regard man as the last term of the Creator. It regards man as the last term in the whole journey through ignorance. Now, in man, there is a possibility to join with the Creator. But this joining, is it only a disembodied soul, or this joining has to be the fullness of being? So, meaning thereby, at the level of man, there are two roads that open before him, or rather three roads. One is the materialist science paradigm where I am what I am, creation of chance, random accidents, freak of nature, and make the most of what we yet may spend until we too into the dust descend. Dust unto dust, under dust to lie, sans wine, sans singer, sans song, sans end. This is Omar Khayyam, Charvak of the West. I mean, his poetry is wonderful, that apart, better than perhaps Charvak Siddhant. But that's one approach to life that we can take, like eat, drink, and be merry. This is the limits. The other is that we can make man a bridge to ascend to a life which is in the beyond. That's what we see later on in the Vedantic understanding of yoga. That's how it developed. That, man is the last material creation. From there we can take an ascension, come out of this life, enter into the beyond. And the reason why this happened, Sri Aurobindo reveals very beautifully. He says in the Vedas we see an integrality. We see a natural synthesis. They were human beings aspiring for greater fullness of being. They didn't have, fortunately, the pretensions of being a yogi. They didn't have all the standard stock phrases and the paths before them. That's why the language of the Vedas sometimes appears obscure, because we want to hear words and phrases that we are accustomed to hear. As the mother says, there are a number of people who are practicing yoga without knowing that it is yoga. There are a number of people who are spiritual without knowing that they are spiritual. So the Vedic rishis had no such pretensions. They were human beings seeking how our life can become better, fuller, diviner. But in Vedanta, so if we see in Veda, there is the inner part, there is also the external part. In Vedas, both these things are beautifully brought together. There is the inner life which can discover the divine, but there is also the outer life with all its rituals, with a deeper meaning, symbolic significance, also actual processes, methods through which life can be made better. If we turn back to the Vedas, we see that almost every aspect of life has been taken care of, whether it be the social order, whether it be marriage, children, everything. And they used it, wealth, all these things are there in the Vedas. Even healing of diseases, cure, every aspect of human existence, we can imagine, and they have covered it. But later on, Vedanta found all this a kind of encumbrance and focused more and more on the essence, the knowledge aspect. In the process, the work side of Veda began to fall away. They were considered as mainly ritualistic, unfortunately, because of certain commentators. And so they picked up more and more of meditative practices, discovering the one behind appearances. Though, as we have already spoken of earlier, this is not exactly the truth of the Vedanta also. But this tendency towards cutting off life into two parts. One was the inner life, and for that inner life, one had to either go into the forest or live in an ashram. And then there was the external life. There were people involved in external life. They were ritualists. They didn't really understand things. Perhaps they didn't because they didn't know the meaning. In the Vedic time, they very beautifully covered this meaning in 2 or 3 layers that we already spoken of, because they understood that this can be dangerous. These things can be dangerous to the uninitiate. So to the initiate, the true meaning was revealed. To others, it was a mass of symbols and imageries and stories. Some of them which, seem to be very fantastic. Just to take one story, there is a story where Indra kills his father and marries his mother. Now, this is scandalous. Poor Indra has to be now dragged into the court after Lord Rama and Krishna. But if you look at the story, anybody who has really practiced yoga, even in the little way, he understands what the story is about. Who is Indra? He is the divine mind. Who is the mother? Material nature. And who is his father? His father is the mental consciousness. So what happens? Out of the mental consciousness, Indra is delivered. Upon earth he is delivered as a divine mind. In a human being, the possibility of divine mind appears. So what does this divine mind, aka Indra, does? He slays the ordinary human mentality. Is of no use. He brings something much greater. Whom does he marry? Material nature, thereby fulfilling her. And not only he marries, he has many offsprings. Now, if we look at this image, which is so direct and straight to yogi, actually you don't need to read the actual rigs. It is so evident. When I had read the story long back, it appeared, oh, that's what they mean. Like later in Puranic legend, you have Brahma falling in love with his own, daughter. And then later on, Saraswati. Then later on, he marries her. So it seems very scandalous to people that how can he fall in love with his own daughter? Well, again, another very beautiful legend where, of course, it's from the Puranas, but we see Brahma is there and Saraswati, both are Vedic goddess. Brahma is Brahmanaspati, Vishnu is there, Rudra is Shiva. So what does he do? Brahma brings out of himself the creative word. Creative word is Saraswati. That's why she is with the Veena. And the two join together. So she is at once his daughter and she is also his consort. And the two come together and, create this wonderful creation with 4 sides, 4 heads. But his 5th head, which is looking up, chasing Saraswati everywhere. The story seems very grotesque, but he's chasing everywhere. Wherever the creative word is going, there the existence follows. But when it comes to the 5th head, which is turned upward, Rudra or Shiva slays this head. Because of which Daksh Prajapati is very angry. So he says that, I'll never, because he is son of Brahma, he says, I'll never allow Shiva to enter into my halls. Now, but the story is so very, who is Rudra? In the Vedas, Brahma, Brahmanaspati, he brings out the creative word out of the subconscious. So they visualize creation moving between 2 great oceans. So one is the lower ocean, the subconscious or the inconscient, aprakratem, salilam, and the other is the superconscious. And creation moves between the two. Now Brahmanaspati, Brahma brings it out with his creative word, the power of the mantra. All this got subsequently lost in the Vedanta. It turned into a philosophical understanding of life. But the power of the mantra, which can actually bring creation out of the subconscious. That's what we see in the story of the Angiras and the cows, and the story of Martand, the 8th son of Aditi, who is hidden inside. By the power of the mantra, it begins to emerge. And it has high formations, high heavens and all this. And when creation emerges out of this state of utter inconscience in which it is lying, it must expand. Who comes? The terrible, violent Rudra. With his force, he makes creation expand everywhere. Brahma cannot, compare with him or chase him. Rudra. So he pierces, takes it up, takes it further and further. Tremendous power and energy, force, manifest force. So you have Brahma as existence, you have Rudra as force. Now comes Vishnu. He has to simultaneously do something about it. So he makes it enter into the vast upper ocean. So you have the 3 strides of Vishnu. And it's such a beautiful imagery. And behind all of them, we should not forget, is our Krishna, Anandamay. So you have the complete picture of Satchidanand playing in creation. Existence comes out. Now we can experience Ananda, but pure existence, pure consciousness, the absolute force is very difficult for human consciousness to experience. So this is such a beautiful image. But if we put it in a story form, it doesn't convey much sense, especially when we try to understand it in the scholarly way. So in the Vedic schools, you had the initiation. That's how the story of initiation comes. By initiation, you understood the mystery. The strange part is you didn't have to really understand the mystery through a logical reasoning, but by practice, you understood the mystery. You practice it, you discover, oh my God, our existence. For instance, first thing we discover when we start our life is how limited we are. This is an experience we have at every moment with all these science and technology and everything at our disposal, we do not know the next step in front. It's amazing passage in Savitri. Man, still a child in nature's mighty hands, in the succession of the moments lives. To a changing present is a narrow right. What a right! Before he can exercise the right, it changes. To a changing present is a narrow right. He looks at imagined garments, not a face. The future flees before him. As he walks, the dead past is his background and support. He waits to weigh the certitude of his thoughts. Yet he doesn't know what he doesn't know, whether he will survive or perish from this earth where he was king, like the mastodon and the sloth. But then it ends with, yet a foreseeing knowledge can be ours. If we could take the spirit's stand within and hear the muffled demon's voice. So they saw this as a journey out of the limitations in which our mind, life, body are tied up, and because of which we cannot live the fullness of our being. Mind is tied up by the god of ignorance. We call it knowledge, but that's our problem. Just a little careful study of ourselves, we'll know that how foolish is this illusion of knowledge. People decide tomorrow we are going to do this. And tomorrow either never comes or brings something completely unexpected. Why all this happens? People say God's curse. No, it's God's benevolence. He reminds us, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Seek a knowledge, seek true knowledge. Well, that's another aspect. So the limitation in the mind because of ignorance. Limitation of life because of desires. They maim life. They make it such a struggling thing. So we don't know how to, really fly effortlessly. Because we don't know which way the wind is sailing us through. We don't know the will within us which is impelling us to move. So desires. Desire, what does it do? It distracts the will. Seek this, find that here, there, and ultimately we lose track. But fortunately, a secret spiritual aid is there. So, this is about life. What about physical existence? It is tied by the cord of death. So, because of these three cords, we cannot live the fullness of a life. And that is the story we see again in the Vedas of Sunashape. He is tied by three cords. The three cords are in the head, in the middle, and in his feet. Is our version of Suli, crucifixion. And he is there at the altar as a sacrifice to the sea. Ignorant waters of nature, to which the human being as an animal is being sacrificed. See the image which has been misunderstood. And so as an animal, human being is tied at the stake perennially to be sacrificed. So he doesn't know what to do. He invokes, and finally God Varuna comes. So he cuts the upper knot, throws it upward. Cuts the knot in the middle, throws it on the side. Cuts the knot below and throws it down. So then we understand these gods are not just symbolic powers. Anyone with a little developed consciousness can experience contact with the gods and even identify with them. They are cosmic helpers in the journey. They are friends of men. And they come to help us cut these knots. So when the mental knot is cut, instead of ignorance, knowledge begins to pour. The clouds are not just, clouds in heaven, and the Vedic rishis were very afraid of the clouds. So they were praying to these cloud gods. Don't pour. They rather asked pour. So the clouds are those beautiful, and the electricity which we often see Indra with. So who is Indra? The divine mind. On one side, he sends electrical lightnings, intuitive flashes that cleave the brain and open the doors to a higher knowledge. On the other side, he pours as rain. See, it's very interesting. So when he pours his rain, it purifies a being, prepares us for higher knowledge. And finally comes Soma, the god of delight. So they are actual entities, and we find in the Vedas the rishis pray to Indra and Varuna as the two great gods. They invoke them because they will come and set us free. So this knot is cut and the mind opens to a greater knowledge. The cord of life is cut. So what happens is no more a narrow, small existence. If one is experiencing too many desires, then it means one is actually extremely incapacitated because one is very, very narrow. And the wider you become, automatically these things begin to fall off. It's something one can study within oneself. That as we grow wider, these things tend to fall off. The narrower we are, a state of acute egoism, you want, and then people go into a shell, they cut themselves off from the delight. So what happens when we are narrow? We cut ourselves from the delight of existence, so we lack the joy, and that joyless state we want to compensate by fulfillment of desire. That's how the whole logic operates. And the third is the knot of death, the physical incapacity and limitation. That knot also he ties and throws it down, meaning thereby still there is some grip of death on the human body, but that thing is prolonged. He can prolong his life. That's how the Vedic rishis knew how to prolong their life. So the attempt of Vedic rishis, and which is the most logical thing to do, if I remain what I am, there is actually no hope. Very beautifully Savitri puts it, that if mind is all, renounce all hope. Death says, incidentally, to Savitri. It is so true. If this is what I am, if there can be nothing greater and better, then frankly there is very little hope, in fact no hope for humanity, if this is all. But if mind is only a step towards a greater summit, then there is hope. So the Vedic rishis, because it seems they were involutionary beings, this is something which the mother reveals to us and which is very evident when we look at them. Because they were beings of a higher consciousness. The rishis and the gods are helpers of man. So they came and they showed the path. They came from there and they came to take man. Come with us. So they knew the path, but of course in the human body they had to work it out. And they said if man must ascend to greater and greater levels of consciousness, and as he ascends to greater levels and claims his own home, his own inheritance, then he will lead a much fuller existence here. So the way of synthesis, and let me put it in today's context. In one context, there are several contexts we can. People fight. People often talk about religions fighting with each other. What is the solution? They say they must understand through mutual understanding, debate, dialogue. It doesn't work out. What is the way to really resolve the problems of religion? Two ways. One is that every religion realizes that religion came much later and humanity and God were before. Go back to the origin. Is there can there be a different origin for the Muslim? Can there be a different origin for the Hindu? A different origin for Christians, Sikhs and all? No. There has to be one origin. And if the origin is one, automatically it implies that we are essentially one, but we are following different approaches. How does it matter? Even if you grant one approach is better, worse, it's really irrelevant. The second is when we evolve beyond religion and graduate into the school of spirituality. These are the two ways. Religion is the creation of a higher mind, and as it enters into the mental field, it becomes dogmas. Same with human beings. People fight, two people living together, they fight. If they don't fight, they can't digest the food. Fight acts like a digestive, like a cooling mint. If they don't fight, they can't sleep. Something is wrong with you, please go and check yourself with a psychiatrist. That's a joke, but anyways, this is a fact of human existence. So some people prefer to live alone. They say, cool, I'll be fine. How much can you live alone? There is in man a tendency towards extending himself. So I'm not saying that marriage is the answer or the solution, but look at how they visualized marriage and relationship. Something which we follow till today, without knowing its deeper symbol. So, what really is marriage about? If you really look at just the ritual of marriage in Vedic age, there was predominant, importance given to sacrifice. So, in the marriage, who is at the center? You have the fire. Now, fire is symbolizes sacrifice, refinement, purification, ascension, everything together. So, the life of a man and woman were meant to be a sacrifice performed together. Instead of doing it alone, they are assisting each other in the ascension. That's all. They brought two different modes of working, and through this, they helped in each other's ascension. It was not a pleasure trip. Life is not a pleasure trip till we have found God. We must understand that should be very clear. All pleasure trips will be accompanied by a spoil sport. And he is the right fellow because he is reminding us, look, life is not a pleasure trip. Otherwise, we would be caught up in a illusion. So, center is the fire. And then you walk all the 7 steps. See all the steps of ascension of the Vedic rishis. 3 steps where she takes in front or he takes in front, and 4th step where she leads. What is that? It's like Purusha and Prakriti relation. There are 3 steps where the Purusha is submerged. He must recover himself. The same story of Indra marrying his mother. And after that, she's the one who delivers. Okay, you are now the leader. And therefore he, along with her, at no stage there is superiority and inferiority. And he begins to lead. So there is this beautiful image of marriage. And the mother puts it so beautifully. You see, it's a completely Vedic conception that the two people must be united, most importantly at the core. If they can be united in all levels, wonderful. At the level of sensations, feelings, thoughts, etc., etc. All that is very good, but she says it is not enough. So, however much we may do matchmaking and kundali matching, this kundali will turn into a kundalini. Vritrasur's kundalini. You know what is kundalini of Vritrasur? The demon who holds, again a Vedic image, everything in his grip. So what is important is that we must see the core. What is the core? That's all that needs to be asked. All other questions, what is your salary? You look good, smart. Okay. Do you know how to cook? It's really irrelevant. What is relevant is, what is the core? If they have discovered. Unfortunately, in today's times, one says, my core is that I want to settle down with lot of money in my hand. The other person says, great, we are together. That is one kind of life. The Vedic rishis outrightly discarded that kind of limited existence. They wanted fullness, outer as well as inner. But outer on the basis of the inner. Outer plenitude with the inner plenitude. Not just outer plenitude. So they focused on the one thing needful, that grow in this inner fire. They assist each other. And when we read the lives of the great rishis and their spouses, it is amazing. It is so inspiring. When you see, you have the image that the Vedic rishi is engaged in sacrifice, and the lady, his wife, is engaged in managing the whole place. She's an embodiment of love. You see, the man is not visible many times because he is absorbed within. This is another Vedic image, very beautiful, where Uma always carries Shiva in her heart. She doesn't know where, but she carries the image and she is searching for him. So what she does in the process, she starts bringing out one form after another, to create him who is already in her heart. And when she creates the perfect form, she mates with him. Together then they start a new creation. Because then, so this Purusha who is concealed within the Ish, the Lord, who is right now Anish, must reclaim, ride above nature. And then when he is the master and Lord, that's why they invoke Indra and Varuna. They are the emperors. Indra is the king and Varuna is emperor. So they invoke these great gods so that man too can become First, a samrat, a king. King over whom? King over himself. Like the Buddha says, I am also a king, when Ashoka and Buddha conversation. What domain you rule? I rule a domain where you don't rule, because you cannot rule. Why? What is that? I rule over all this outer land. And Buddha says, I rule over myself. This is not Vedic. In his own way, he was reaffirming this deep truth. First, man must reclaim this kingdom. And then, yes, quite naturally, the outer plenitude will follow, because the law of life is from within outwards. All creation is like that. See, that is the difference between an artificial flower and one that grows naturally. A natural one goes through the process of evolution. So, Vedas speak of evolution, they speak about this fire at the center. They looked upon life as a constant sacrifice done to ascend towards fullness. And that's one word, if there is one word we have forgotten, which has become the bane of a Deyatmik Bodh society, which is just seeking after pleasure and desire, is sacrifice, the law of sacrifice. And you see invariably when you visualize the Vedic Rishi, what is he doing? He is constantly sacrificing. First thing that comes is he is lighting up a fire and he's putting in it ghee and all this, and there are I want to use a strong word, but truly idiotic people who believed that this is all, they were pouring ghee to, okay, getting rain and all is fine. But they were far deep and profound, when at least when I read about these sages in the true sense, what they meant, you invariably bow your head in humility. Who were these men? Which people said they were barbaric and primitive? If ever there were human beings who were truly intelligent with the true intelligence, they were our own forefathers. And humble to an extent that they will say, we learned it from our forefathers. They did not claim a separate religion or a sect for themselves. And these people, what were they doing with this sacrifice? They believed that these energies of nature, one is unconscious evolution that creates man. This is there in Vedanta. The whole idea of rebirth is to give us an inner continuity of life through which the soul ascends. All this idea about, if you are a spy, you will become a chipkali and so on and so forth is all nonsensical way of filling the whole Vedic lore, which is so profound. Rebirth is the only logical way to bring in the continuity of individual evolution. Just like Chatur Yugas is the only logical way, and Avatar, to bring in the continuity of the cosmic evolution. Otherwise, it's all appear disconnected. So, at the center of this is the human soul on its journey. What happens from the human? Now a new journey starts. The child has grown up. The Kumar, there is another story, which is, if you read it, the way it has been interpreted is so grotesque that the mother compressed the child in the womb as if she was trying to strangulate the child. And then she became wide, and the child came out. And when the child came out, he was crushed by Indra's chariot, all kinds of fantastic things. The story is so simple and direct. Who is the mother? She is the material creation. Who is this Kumar Sambhav? That story of Shiva and Parvati giving birth to Kartikeya. He is the psychic flame, the soul within, the divine will growing within and asserting itself. If you want to put it at a larger level, the seventh cosmic level is the seventh son of Aditi, Martand, struggling against the darkness from within. So God has the super backup plan. What is that super backup plan? He is not just above and below. He has cast himself into the lower creation, right into the depth of the darkness. So his plan is foolproof. He himself is below, lying in the inconscient, emerging Martand, the warrior aspect who eventually struggles against the force of darkness. So all evolution is a pressure from above and from within. So from within this baby is growing, and as he grows, the material nature expands. Our consciousness grows wider till a point comes when the baby is delivered. What does he do? He weds the mother again. Why does he wed the mother? Because that's how he can fulfill her. It's such a beautiful story, and all of them, of course. So, what were they doing? This sacrifice was that this is the first stage is when the baby is delivered, when we become conscious. And with this becoming conscious, of course, truly becoming conscious means conscious of the soul, but that's not so easy. So, we become at least conscious in the mind of some ray of light of the soul. And then we start performing the sacrifice. And it's such a simple process. Offer your intelligence to that from which all intelligence comes. You see, the whole Gayatri mantra, so beautifully. We start every time Rashtram starts with, Sri Aurobindo's Gayatri. So we are invoking that source of intelligence to illumine the mind. So what happens? The mind becomes effulgent. It enters into the cosmic domains. It receives knowledge which is concealed. Its mode of functioning changes. It's no more the rational analytical process, but a direct, revelatory, intuitive, and still further. And because this mind begins to ascend, it starts living in a state of Swaralok, the rays of the sun. It can reach there and remain in a state of tranquil joy, even when everything outside is becoming topsy-turvy. Of course, such a person will look very strange when he is laughing, feeling very amused at all the things going. But you can't help it. The mind reaches that point where it remains in that state of tranquil joy. So this is the ascension of the buddhi, of the intelligence, the limited intelligence which is still towards animal wants and needs, and you added to it human greed. And when it tends to turn upward by sacrifice. Sacrifice meaning thereby, instead of turning this intelligence downward, turn it upwards towards seeking of the greater possibility. And for that it must sacrifice, purify, refine. Gross intelligence lives with Dehatma Bodh. It believes the appearances are real. And the true intelligence begins to develop when we understand appearances are appearances. Reality is behind it. That's how, whether we take the approach of science or spirituality, that's the sign that intelligence is being awakened. And then, of course, when we have a complete awakening of intelligence, cosmic intelligence, then we understand that we understand paradoxical thing. For instance, nothing can be known. Another paradoxical is all is forever known. The knower and the known are one. He who knows, knows it not. Because you enter into a free universal intelligence. It's no more bound and limited by the little limited sensory apparatus and the mind tied to it. So that's how the mental fullness. When this mind becomes full, its perception changes. When it looks at a tree, it doesn't look at it only as a tree. When it looks at a mountain, it doesn't look at it only as mountains. These imagery becomes so beautiful, and therefore its relation changes with life. It starts looking at gods as real cosmic powers and beings and agencies. So when it prays to God to remove an obstacle, it is not the sign of an obscurity. It's the sign of a growing light within. That look here, there is the Lord of the mountains and the tempest. So what happens? How does Vedic culture come from there? So when you go to a mountain, you pray to Shiva, to Rudra, to make your journey smooth. Not only that, every mountain has its own deity. I have a very interesting story. In Leh Ladakh, there is a mountain called Khardung La. La is the peak. Every mountain has a deity. And of course, there are Babas. They're one of the mountains where, you have to enter the temple, pray to the deity, and then you continue with your journey. It's a real story of one of these army trucks where, people, you have to tie with chains sometimes because the passage is because of the ice, you cannot go just like that. So the wheels are tied with chains. So that when they are tying with chains, you go and pray. So one of the fellows said, "Are all this is all bakwas." And strangely the truck slipped downward. Now this, whatever way you understand it, whether you understand as a formation or not, they are deities, they are living beings. And instead of calling it as Pejan or something, it is something so beautiful. that there is the spirit in trees, there is the spirit in water bodies. And actually, you can spirit of fire. And all this is a kind of conscious connection with nature. Spirit of the rivers, nothing is unconscious in the Vedic image. Everything is conscious with the presence of the divine, but not just divine as a presence inside, but also there are agencies, powers, aspects. That is how we have the pantheon of 33 crore gods and goddesses who govern this creation and cosmos. And the Vedic rishis had found a way to connect with them. This is another approach to life, very valid. We have lost it. Even with snake bites, I've seen in villages, these things being practiced. And because we have lost that art, so now we, of course, think all this is superstition. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But it was not just the mantra, but along with mantra, there are aspects you have to invoke. Then we understand the Sanjeevani Bhuti and all these things. So this was an approach of discovering. When the mind upgrades itself, it looks at life anew and discovers another way of operating, another way of mastering, extending itself. And the same happens at all the levels. When we offer the energies of life, you see that horse, the Dikravan, who takes the chariot of the sun. So, a very interesting images. So, our life force right now is maimed. Why sun needs the chariot? This very famous novel on this, written by, I think, Dharmveer Bharati, Suraj Ka Athwa Ghoda. So, what are these horses, steeds, which are driving the chariot of the sun? Is it where they didn't understand that the sun is not moving, the earth is, they knew all this. And yet they gave this image of the sun with the chariot moving in all the directions. And so much of Vedic lore is built around it. What was the chariot which moves the sun? Sun is the tremendous energy which human beings cannot hold, the life force within us cannot hold. Unless it is purified and refined, that earth's weak feeblings, feeble life force becomes truth's steeds in heaven. That's how Sri Aurobindo is. Here we can only imagine a life which is freed and strong, and we can only imagine, we can fantasize. But Sri Aurobindo says, earth's winged chimeras, they're called as chimeras. Most people who will say, "Arey, all this is all mambo jumbo." Let them say it. Let them remain a jumbo or a dumbo. It's up to them. But earth's winged chimeras are truth's steeds in heaven. Whom do they carry? They carry the sun himself, the effulgent. Otherwise, the life force cannot continue. So they have to be yoked together. This effulgence of the mind and the force of life must come together. If they are not yoked together, it will create a kind of mismatch, rupture, burning away, all kinds of things. And then, of course, we have the body in which must be prepared like a vessel to hold. So they are the Vedic gods. Even sun has different names. Pushan, who nourishes. Twastri, who fashions. And we have Ribhus, who are human beings who have become gods. What do? They are artisans of immortality. They know what mortality is about. The Ashwins, the pairs, very often we'll see all these gods are invoked in pairs. Varuna and Mitra, or Varuna and Indra. So they are always called in pairs. So Ashwins, they come and they actually make the flow of current through the nerves smooth, so that we can hold the wine. They prepare the vessel for the Soma, the Ananda, who will come at the end. He will only ask, is the vessel ready? Can I pour my delight into this cup? Rare is the cup fit for love's nectar wine. As rare is soul that can hold God's birth. A soul made ready through 1,000 years is the living mold of a supreme descent. It is prepared. They are very patient. They are not impatient like us. We want quick things, fast food. When will this happen? They are very patient. They worked patiently because they knew that creation extends through lives. They are not in a hurry. So they were fashioning Godhead out of the human clay. And unless man completes this evolution and lives in the fullness of the greater consciousness, he cannot really, to talk about synthesis, integralization of life, integrating creation with the creator, it will remain incomplete. At our present level, we cannot. So they focused on the one thing needful. The journey of man is a journey of ascension through sacrifice, in which gods are our helpers and there are cosmic powers of darkness which obstruct. There is Namuchi, there is Vritra, that serpent who will coil around, refuse to give way. Last battle between Indra and Vritra. And even when he slays Vritra, he brings out 1,000 more. That's why Sri Aurobindo says the law of the way. He says, hell will vomit its hordes and heaven will meet thee with its cold and pitiless denials. That is the human journey. And they were so courageous, men of faith, men of steel. You can make a movie on them, men of steel, instead of all those nonsensical. What kind of practice they were engaged in for the fullness of life. And what fullness, when you read these stories, I feel at once. So, you see, rational mind has started, one of the biggest bane is that's made us disbelief in many of these stories. Oh, Dadichi's bones being used by Indra to slay Vritrasur. Oh, it is, how can it be? But these are true stories of the man's inner life as well as outer life. Kamdhenu is not a dream or an imagination. A man like Vasishtha who has mastered all his desires can, by the movement of a will, do what is needed, but not through the agency of desire, but directly. You see, there is very interesting, there are stories outside also, but about the ashram context we know here. Have you ever wondered, sometimes visitors average is 2,000 people or whatever, 1,500, and in peak time 10,000 comes. How is it managed? There is one particular story of the mother which is quoted by Narayan Prasad in Life in Sri Aurobindo Ashram, where once Divan Bhai went and said, there is no rice, and suddenly so many people have come. Mother paused for a moment and then she said, okay, you go and do this, and something she said, asked him to do, is this there in Life in Sri Aurobindo Ashram? And the man found just enough rice which was meant to feed everybody. How that rice came? There are so many stories like that. There is a place called Sherwind Gram where there was famine in MP that time, and she just gave few grains of wheat and said, sow it. And there was bumper crop 3 times. How she would ask the rains to hold on for some time. These are the ways that they interacted with nature as a living conscious entity. How they could do it? Because they had mastered the forces of nature within. Outer nature, material nature, and inner nature. They realized the continuity between them. Outside, Rudra the terrible is storms and earthquakes. And inside, Rudra the terrible is warlike impulses, violent deeds. Master this within, you can master the storm outside. In mother's real life, you find these stories. Enter into a state of vastness inside, you can arrange things outside in a much better harmonious way. This was their path. So much more, but we'll just close by reading something from Sri Aurobindo. When all the faculties and efforts of body, life, mind, and the supramental part are poised in equality, not just one part, and self-contained in their respective places, when no one has domination over the being, and there is no revolt or anarchy, when each one accepts the sovereignty of its respective godhead of the higher nature and is accustomed to execute its special work with joy at the time and in the measure fixed by the divine, when the being is lord of its own dominion, real emperor over the inner kingdom of its instrument, when there is deep peace along with a mighty, luminous and boundless power of action, when all its faculties listen to its order and accomplish the work perfectly, with mutual cooperation for the joy of the being, or when it tastes fathomless peace and ineffable delight by plunging into a deep, shadowless inaction at will. Such a state of being was called by the Vedantists of the earliest times the kingdom, dominion over self, or the empire, dominion over others. Indra and Varuna, particularly, are masters of this state. They are emperors. Indra, when he becomes emperor, sets in motion all the faculties. And Varuna, when he becomes emperor, governs the faculties and exalts them. But all are not qualified to receive the help of these two sublime immortals. Only when one has knowledge and is established in tranquility can he claim their help. One has to be Vipra. Then one is able to receive. There has to be an illumined state of mind through it, through tranquility. And then there are a number of, Sribindra translates Mandala 1, Sukta 75 for instance. O flame, what I am expressing is very wide and vast, an object of enjoyment for the gods. Devour it with love. What is sacrifice? They are giving it to the gods. Take all these offerings in thy mouth. O divine energy, thou art the most powerful of all the powers and the highest divinity. May the sacred hymn of my heart, which I am uttering, become thy favorite, and thou the triumphant enjoyer of what I desire, and so on and so forth. And finally, one last passage. The development of all these Godheads is necessary to a perfection, and that perfection must be attained on all our levels. In the wideness of earth, our physical being and consciousness, in the full force of vital speed and action and enjoyment and nervous vibration, typified as the horse which must be brought forward to upbear our endeavor, in the perfect gladness of the heart, of emotion and a brilliant heat and clarity of the mind throughout our intellectual and psychical being, in the coming of the supramental light, the dawn and the sun and the shining mother of the hearts, to transform all our existence. Finally, this closes with that ascension has already been effected by the ancients, the human forefathers. They have opened the path for us, though it has been, closed due to dust of the centuries, but then Sri Aurobindo has again ensured and taken the path, still made it wider. And the spirits of these great ancestors still assist their offspring, for the new dawns repeat the old and lean forward in light to join the dawns of the future. So they continue to assist man. Thus the soul is a battlefield full of helpers and hurters, friends and enemies, not outside but within us. All this lives, teems, is personal, is conscious, is active. We create for ourselves by the sacrifice and by the word, shining seers, heroes to fight for us, children of our works. So by the mantra and the sacrifice, we have the offsprings and the heroes and the seers. The rishis and the gods find for us our luminous hearts, hidden in the subconscious. The ribus fashioned by the mind, the chariots of the gods, the nervous system and our physical being, and their horses and their shining weapons. Our life is a horse that neighing and galloping bears us onward and upward. Its forces are swift-hoofed steeds, the mouth of the horse, Ashwamedh. That's how the liberated powers of the mind are wide-winging birds. This mental being or this soul is the upsoaring swan or the falcon that breaks out from 100 iron walls and rests from the jealous guardians of felicity, the vine of the Soma. Every shining Godward thought that arises from the secret abysses of the heart is a priest and a creator, and chants a hymn of luminous realization and puja fulfillment. The soul of man is a world full of beings, a kingdom in which armies clash to help or hinder a supreme conquest, a house where the gods are our guests and which the demons strive to possess. They come through all kinds of doors. They know all these creepy, shippy entries, holes. They will find ways, chinks. But gods are our guests. They should be our guests. The fullness of its energies and wideness of its being make a seat of sacrifice, spread, arranged, and purified for a celestial session. Such are some of the principal images of the Veda and a very brief and insufficient outline of the teaching of the forefathers. So understood, the Rig Veda ceases to be an obscure, confused, and barbarous hymnal. It becomes the high aspiring song of humanity. Its chants are episodes of the lyrical epic of the soul in its immortal ascension. Namaste.